Good day, everyone. Ms. Banwa and I are given the task to share to you all the moral challenges brought about by globalization. But before we formally start, let us recall what is meant by the term globalization. In essence, globalization is about the world becoming increasingly interconnected. Countries today are more connected than ever before due to factors such as air travel, containerized sea shipping, international trade agreements, and legal treaties and the internet. Globalization is the name given the reality that the world is becoming more and more closely linked by international trade, monetary policy, investments, and high speed communication. In a world of limited resources, we are faced with the competing values of politics, corporate power, religion, and simply humanity. Take, for example, this scenario that we have read from Sarah Elberg in her speech delivered on January 13, 2002. It seems that there were four people in a small airplane that was spinning out of control and about to crash: George W. Bush, Bill Gates, Dalai Lama, and a hippie backpacker. There were only three parachutes. President Bush said, "I'm the leader of the free world, so I need to have one of the chutes." He took one and jumped out of the plane. Bill Gates then said, "Listen, I'm the smartest man in the world, so I'd better take one too." He took one and leaped out. Then Dalai Lama said to the hippie, "I am an old man and have made my mark on the world, but you have your life ahead of you. Go ahead, you take the last parachute." The hippie looked at him and calmly said, "Chill, man, not to worry. The smartest man in the world just jumped out of the plane with my backpack." To start explaining, President Bush represents the power of political pressure in a world in which the United States is the only superpower. Bill Gates stands for the corporate triumph of the free market over all other economic forms and its potential hazards. The Dalai Lama symbolizes the altruistic and moral spirit of religion, which is largely missing in our haste to globalize the world. The hippie backpacker represents all of us, bystanders watching the others control our lives with a serious stake in what is happening. According to Sarah, the problem is that today's globalization is driven by multinational corporations who don't think and act in terms of human consequences but are solely concerned with their own interests and bottom lines. This globalization has bullied and sipped its way into every nook of humanity, with results that are indeed sobering if not downright scary. Some of the results include loss of democracy, human rights violations, rapid environmental degradation, expanding poverty and inequality, and increased starvation. We should not fear globalization as such, but we should be afraid of globalization as it is being played out according to the imperialistic goals of a few rich people. Globalization per se is not evil. In fact, it is both inevitable and desirable. The world is not the same as it was in the past. We are necessarily part of a world community, and that community needs to work together to make life better for everyone. That is the promise of globalization, and that is why many people support it. In the eyes of its proponents, it is the result of forces driving a powerful engine of technological innovation and economic growth that is strengthening human freedom, spreading democracy, and creating the wealth needed to end poverty and save the environment throughout the globe. However, there are moral challenges that we need to be certainly aware of. We have gathered six, and these are the following: inequality, global environment collapse, democratic values, economic justice, military spending, and arms trade. The first one is the increase in gap between the rich and the poor. The supporters of globalization believe that inequality is decreasing, but anti supporters claim otherwise. While some countries benefit from globalization, others are left behind with increasing inequality. For example, globalization can increase inequality in a relatively rich country by increasing the imports of manufactured goods using predominantly low-skilled labor from developing countries. Conversely, it opens more opportunities for exports in high-tech firms that use more high-skilled labor. These two forces can widen the gap between high-skilled and low-skilled workers. Technological change can also potentially increase inequality. Fewer secretaries, typists, or assembly line workers are needed if computers and automation replace them in the production process. Conversely, newer technology can increase the demand for the services of, say, engineers who can service those machines. While the two explanations are not mutually exclusive for a long time, many economists tend to favor the technological explanation. If the trade was the stronger component of the story, then we would expect high skill intensive industries to get bigger, while less skill intensive industries got smaller. High tech industries would expand as they serviced export markets. Older manufacturing industries such as textiles would disappear in the face of imports. Next is global environment collapse. One consideration that isn't often discussed about globalization is how it affects the environment. One thing, however, is clear. Globalization does impact the environment, and typically not in a positive way. Globalization has certainly negative impacts on the environment, and these are the following. First is the increase in transport of goods. One of the primary results of globalization is that it opens businesses up to new markets in which they can sell goods and source labor, raw materials, and components. Both of these realities mean finished products travel farther now than ever before, potentially halfway around the globe. In the past, products were more likely to be produced, sold, and consumed more locally. This increased transport of goods can impact the environment in several ways, including increased emissions. Because the farther a product travels, the more fuel is consumed, and a greater level of greenhouse gas emissions is produced. These emissions contribute to pollution, climate change, and ocean acidification around the world and have been shown to significantly impact biodiversity. Next is habitat destruction. Transportation, especially when land based, requires infrastructure like roads and bridges. The development of such infrastructure can lead to issues including habitat loss and pollution. It's worth noting that approximately 70% of all freight is transported by ship, according to a report by the International Transport Forum. The more ships that travel by sea, the greater the chances for major oil spills or leaks that damage the delicate marine environment. The next is invasive species. Every shipping container and vessel presents an opportunity for a living organism, from plants to animals to fungus, to hitch a ride to a new location where it can become invasive and grow without checks and balances that might be present in its natural environment. The next is economic specialization. One often overlooked side effect of globalization is that it allows nations and geographical regions to focus on their economic strengths, content in knowing they can turn to trading partners for goods they don't produce themselves. This economic specialization often boosts productivity and efficiency. Unfortunately, Overspecialization can lead to serious environmental issues, often in the form of habitat loss, deforestation, or natural resource overuse. A few examples include that we've gathered is first, illegal deforestation in Brazil due to an increase in the country's cattle ranching operations, which require significant land for grazing. Second is overfishing in coastal areas that include Southeast Asia, which has significantly contributed to reduced fish populations and oceanic pollution. Then, overdependence on cash crops such as coffee, cacao, and various fruits, which has contributed to habitat loss, especially in tropical climates. It is worth considering that globalization has allowed some nations to specialize in producing various energy commodities such as oil, natural gas, and timber. Nations that depend on energy sales to fund a large portion of their national budgets, along with those that note quote unquote energy security as a priority, are more likely to take intervening actions in the market in the form of subsidies or laws that make transitioning to renewable energy more difficult. The main byproduct of these energy sources comes in the form of greenhouse gas emissions, which significantly contribute to global warming and climate change. Then we have decreased biodiversity, increased greenhouse gas emissions, ocean acidification, deforestation, and other forms of habitat loss or destruction, climate change, and the introduction of invasive species all work to reduce biodiversity around the globe. According to the World Wildlife Fund's recent Living Planet report, the population sizes of all organisms, including mammals, birds, fish, amphibians, and reptiles have decreased 68% since 1970s. Latin America and Africa, two rapidly developing regions important to global trade, have seen disproportionate levels of biodiversity loss, especially among environmentally sensitive fish, reptiles, and amphibians. While this decrease in biodiversity has many causes, it's widely believed that the issues listed above have contributed in part. The third step in global thinking is to expand our understanding of democracy. Too often, democracy is discussed only in its most formal mode. People are satisfied that democracy has a place in the constitution of the state, but make no room for democracy in the constitution of their own soul. They do not let it affect their daily interactions, their personal relationships, or their professional ambitions. For this reason, some of the greatest leaders have called for profound change in our values. But a democratic revolution is not merely sentimental and individualistic. Yes, it demands changes in the way we live and the way we understand ourselves, but it also promises to change the structures that govern our society. For at its core, democracy is a radical philosophy of civic participation. It is the faith that through public dialogue and inclusive deliberation, ordinary individuals can build ever better systems for living together. Democracy rests on the need for all citizens, not only the most powerful, to be able to influence meaningfully the political and economic institutions that affect their lives. As we begin to renew our faith in democracy, each one of us must reconsider the privileges we enjoy as citizens in a prosperous country and as beneficiaries of this fine universe. And we must embrace the responsibility that comes with this privilege. In this democracy, there is no room for guilt, but only for compassion. The point is, not to feel guilty about the gifts we have received, but to feel always committed to the struggle to guarantee that all people may live such dignified lives. There is no place for resignation, but only determination. Though world problems may seem overwhelming, we must be determined to make our mark against poverty and inequality. And there is no stopping at simple charity, but instead, we must expand our solidarity. Our concern for the health and well being of others must spread through all lands. While we must reclaim the democratic values that inspired the Enlightenment revolutions, we must also go beyond the comfortable limits of traditional civics and grapple with the international challenges of the day. We have already seen that developed nations, while claiming to protect democracy in the developing world, have too often protected only a narrow, nationalistic self interest. We can no longer afford to think in terms of a simple nationalism. In the global era, true democrats must also be humanists. For when we believe that people controlling their own lives is a truly sound basis for this nation, we begin to recognize the inherent dignity and worth of people in other lands as well as people struggling to exercise their right of self determination and to forge their own models for development.
And next in more challenges in globalization is economic justice. Reformulating our perspective on economic justice is one of the most important aspects of global thought. True democracy entails not just the distribution of political power, but also the distribution of economic power. Unfortunately, in this day and age of mega merger, this point is all often disregarded. Many policymakers and business leaders are oblivious to it as they silently cement a global economic order based on the cynicism and personal gain. However, this is an undeniable fact for many poor and working. And perhaps what makes today economic exploitation and hardship even more cruel is that it interacts with incredible affluence and luxury. If this expenditure were diverted, example, US citizen would spend $8 billion on cosmetic each year, which is $2 billion more than it would cost to offer basic education to everyone on the planet. And another example, Europeans spend $11 billion on ice cream each year, yet we know that only $9 billion would be enough to provide everyone with safe drinking water and sanitation. To reverse these unacceptably negative trends, our civilization must learn to understand global institutions through the eyes of society's most marginalized population, the culturally oppressed and economically disadvantaged. We must reject trickle-down solutions to global crises in our democratic belief, and instead promote movements that empower marginalized and marginalized groups to become political actors. And next, military spending. While reasonable aid policies and debt forgiveness are crucial components of our fight for human development, we must also concentrate our effort on regulating a global military industrial complex free of democratic restraint and humanitarian standards. Military spending is without a doubt the greatest serious diversion of global priorities currently known. In order to understand the true human cost of militarism, as well as the true impact of unregulated arms sales in the world today, we must understand that war is not just an evil act of destruction. It is a missed opportunity for humanitarian investment. It is a crime against every child who calls out for food rather than for guns, and against every mother who demands simple vaccination rather than $1 million fighters. Like, for example, $780 billion spent on weapons and soldiers in 1997 constitute a global tragedy. If we channel just $40 billion each year away from armies and into anti-poverty program, in 10 years all of the world population would enjoy basic social service education, healthcare and nutrition, potable water and sanitation, and another $40 billion each year over 10 years would provide each person on this planet with an income level above the poverty line for the country. Shockingly, this life-giving $800 billion in annual fund would represent only 10% of world defense expenditures. And world leaders must stop viewing militaristic investment as a measure of national well-being. And they must embrace multilateral efforts that recognize the complex and politicized nature of contemporary security questions. My last part of my report is arms trade. One key component of this task will be controlling the reckless distribution of weapons throughout the world. The sale of arms is big business in today's world. As a whole, military funding in industrial nations is down from its peak of 10 years ago. But weapons contractors in these countries have continued to produce billions of dollars worth of armaments, and in fact have increased their weapon sales abroad. Their new clients are the impoverished countries of the developing world, places where the majority of conflicts now take place. In this regard, United States stand out as an extreme case, but it is by no means unique in an ethical shortcoming of its policy. Currently, the US is responsible for 40% of all weapon sales in the world. As of 2020, $175 billion of US arms sales to the developing country went to non-democratic governments. In pursuing true solutions to contemporary defense concerns and in creating policies that will allow us to focus on human security, we urgently need to work together as an international community to limit the availability and spread of deadly weapons. And that's all for my part. Thank you.
Indeed, globalization is aggravating issues such as food, health, personal security, economic security, environmental security, and political security, all of which are a concern under human security. Human security reflects the growing mutual vulnerability posed by globalization and the higher level of interconnectedness in the international system. This interconnectedness is by no means new, but the degree of vulnerability that it creates is important. Political communities have always been affected in some manner by the actions of others. However, vulnerability affects not just states, but also local communities and individuals. Furthermore, the interconnectedness of individuals and communities has implications for the entire international system, as problems in the weakest regions have ramifications for the more powerful ones. This has resulted in a condition where no region in the international system may be immune to human security risks in another. Conceptually, one reason why human security does not fit easily into traditional notions of security concerns is that many human security matters are often thought to be within the realm of domestic, not international responsibility. But while we may examine issues at the domestic level, there is still an intractable link between domestic events and the international community, and that is once again because of globalization, because of how interconnected and interdependent some of the countries are across the globe. This is not to suggest that the state is somehow eliminated from this relationship. Rather, responses to human security encompass the interests of the state, multilateral or transnational actors, and the international community as a whole. Given the interconnectedness of states in the international system, events at the domestic level unavoidably spill over into the international arena.